The chandeliers at Lake Travis Country Club cast a honeyed light across lacquered floors, the kind that made every sequin dress catch and hold a glow. Strings hummed from a discreet quartet near the terrace doors, and the lake beyond, blue and glass still, looked like it had dressed in evening wear to match the guests. Staff in crisp black moved through the splayed rooms with practiced grace, setting down silver trays, refreshing flutes, adjusting napkins so each fold mirrored the next. At the center of it all stood Evelyn Hart, at 52, flawless in pale satin with a sheen like poured champagne. Her hair swept into immaculate waves that did not dare disobey. She smiled the way women smile when the room is theirs and the night will bend to their will. Guests arrived in twos and threes, partners in real estate, boutique owners, a former councilwoman, the general manager of a gallery, who wore his scarf indoors as if it were a credential. They congratulated Evelyn with air kisses and polished phrases, the kind that sound personal and cost nothing. When someone told her she hadn't aged a day, she responded as if she believed it, and when another remarked on the lilies towering in the entry hall, she thanked them as though she had engineered each petal herself. Sandra Whitby clung to her elbow, Sandra of the manicured laugh and evergreen tan, whispering commentary that traveled no farther than the rim of Evelyn's glass. Lydia Collins' Hart paused at the threshold with Blake, checking the ribbon on the bouquet she held. Wildflowers from the hill country. Bluebonnets were out of season, but the florist had found a compromise of Indian blanket, black-eyed Susan, and delicate sprays that suggested the same wind. Lydia had chosen them because they smelled like open fields after rain, and because a bouquet should say something about the giver. She wore a simple navy dress with a modest neckline and soft curls pinned back from her face. She had wanted to look appropriate, not expensive. Blake, comfortable in the room in a way she was not, squeezed her hand and said this would be fine. His tie was new. She had picked it for him last week. They crossed the marble, and the sound of the quartet seemed to sharpen as they stepped into view. A few guests glanced over with polite interest. Then, with that subtle second look Lydia had learned to recognize, curiosity curdling into classification. Sandra's mouth tilted. Evelyn noticed, glided forward, and when the flowers reached her line of sight, her smile acquired a careful layer of surprise. "Oh," Evelyn said, bright and echoing. "How charming." "It's from the hills," Lydia said, offering the bouquet with both hands. "I grew up outside Waco. These always made my mother happy." "Country flowers," Sandra murmured, as if tasting the phrase. "So authentic." Evelyn's fingers touched the ribbon, not the stems. "Yes, very evocative." She pivoted, already signaling a server. "Would you mind finding a vase and perhaps a quieter corner? Somewhere cool." The bouquet began to drift away, ferried by someone whose smile did not change. Lydia watched it travel past a table of orchids and a tower of macarons, the bright prairie colors shrinking against the room's pale palette until they looked like a misplaced picnic. Blake kissed his mother's cheek. "Happy birthday, Mom. You look incredible." "Thank you, sweetheart." Evelyn's eyes lingered on him, then flicked to Lydia with a benevolent appraisal that missed warmth by a few degrees. "You made it in good time." "We did," Lydia said, and tried to smile past the static in her chest. She could name the textures in the room, the satin, the glass, the polished wood, but could not find a place to set down her uncertainty. She anchored herself to details, the faint citrus in the air, the reflection of chandeliers on the lake, the rhythm of a waltz that no one danced to. She had been in lovely rooms before, but this one seemed to require a password she did not know how to pronounce. Charles Hart approached with a measured gait, a quiet counterpoint to the room's performance. He hugged Blake, then turned to Lydia and took her hand in both of his. "Evening, Lydia. Glad you're here." His voice had that grounded timbre of a man who had spent years outdoors listening for what the wind might change. He did not comment on the flowers. He did not need to. He held her gaze a second longer than necessary, and in that second she felt the ground solidify beneath her feet. Dad, Blake said, relieved at the normalness of him. Place looks great, right? Evelyn knows how to put on a night, Charles replied, neutral and true. Sandra chimed in, already amused by something only she could hear. Lydia, we were just saying how bold a bouquet can be. It tells a story, doesn't it? City girls choose lilies. Country girls choose what they know. Lydia's lips pressed into a shape that looked like a smile from afar. I chose what I love. Of course you did, Evelyn said, pleasant as a bell. That's the charm. Around them, the room rearranged itself into conversations that glinted. A real estate couple compared square footage the way other people compare grandchildren. The councilwoman described a fundraiser as if it were a military campaign. Laughter rose and fell like well-timed surf. A photographer, stealthy in black, captured Evelyn beneath the chandelier, Sandra at her shoulder, Blake mid-laugh, Lydia at the edge of the frame where the lake's reflection began. A server offered a tray. Lydia took a flute and held it like a prop. The bubbles gathered and rose, insistent as a thought she could not swallow. Evelyn led them to a circle of guests and began the introductions. She said names that mattered in Austin, attached them to bios smoothed by practice. When she reached Lydia, she paused the way a docent pauses before a painting you're not supposed to touch. And this is Lydia, Evelyn said. Blake's wife. There was a beat of polite interest. Lydia dipped her chin, found Charles again over his shoulder. He gave the smallest nod. Steady, steady. Evelyn's smile widened just one more notch, and her tone acquired that bright hint of condescension a trained ear can hear. She teaches elementary school. From Waco originally. Very grounded. Quite the contrast to the city, but sweet in its way. Grounded, Sandra repeated, tasting it the way she had tasted country flowers. How wholesome. A few soft laughs fluttered around the circle, the kind that do not mean anything until they do. Lydia felt them brush her skin like a draft. She thought of the bouquet cooling somewhere out of sight and of the classroom she loved, construction paper suns, glue sticks, the earnest gravity of small hands learning to write their names. She thought of how work said who you were, and how some rooms refused to listen. Evelyn lifted her glass. To 52, she said, to the circle and to the camera that had drifted close again. To good friends, good taste, and family. She let the last word hover, then turned just enough that the group's eyes followed the movement. And to Lydia, our dear teacher from Waco. Quite simple, isn't she? The laughter this time arrived fully formed, polite on the surface and sharp underneath. It scattered like beads across the floor and rolled into corners. Lydia's smile stayed where she had put it, steady but thinner now, while Charles watched from just behind the ring of shoulders, his expression a quiet anchor against a room intent on drifting. The dinner courses had begun their quiet rhythm, plates exchanging for fresh ones, glasses being refilled before they were even half empty. Outside the wide windows, Lake Travis mirrored the twilight, a ribbon of liquid steel under the string lights curling along the terrace. Inside, warmth and laughter pressed against the glass. When the main course had been cleared, a staff member placed a small silver bell beside Evelyn Hart's seat. She touched it lightly, and the chatter folded itself into silence. The quartet slipped into a softer melody. All eyes turned to her. Evelyn rose, every inch the hostess in command, her glass catching the light like a spotlight's cue. My dear friends, she began, voice mellow with self-assurance, tonight isn't just another birthday. It's a reminder of how far one comes when one refuses to settle. I've spent my life building not just a business, but a name, a family name that means something in this town. She paused for the practiced ripple of approval. And I am grateful to every one of you who stood beside me while I kept that name shining. Applause refined and measured. Lydia's fingers tightened around her napkin. She knew what was coming. Evelyn's toasts always found a stage for someone else's lesson. A voice from the far end of the table called, half teasing. "Tell us about your secret weapon, Evelyn. That son of yours." Laughter followed, and Evelyn placed a hand over her heart as though bashful. "Ah, Blake," she said, turning the full wattage of her smile toward her son. "He is my pride, a man who knows what it means to elevate, to guide, to save a wandering soul when he sees one." She looked down the table to Lydia, letting the pause lengthen just enough. "Why, he even rescued one from a farm outside Waco and brought her all the way to Austin." For a moment, silence thickened before the laughter broke. Bright, polite, devastating. Forks clicked against china. Someone clapped as if she'd told a joke worth keeping. Lydia's face flushed, the heat climbing to her ears. She managed a small smile, the kind that feels like splinters against the skin. Sandra Whitby leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the same kind of mischief that comes easy to the comfortable. "See," she chimed, "who says love can't change a person's class? I call that true transformation." More laughter, softer this time, but just as sharp. Blake's jaw tightened. He stared at his plate, then reached for his glass. He did not defend her. His silence, as always, made everything sound truer. Lydia lowered her eyes to the tablecloth, tracing the weave with the edge of her fork. Words fluttered through her mind, retorts, explanations, things that would have balanced the scales, but they all dissolved before they reached her tongue. The air smelled of butter and lilies, and underneath, humiliation. Evelyn's toast continued, now coasting on the easy current of attention. She thanked sponsors for the boutique's latest charity gala, praised Sandra for her impeccable taste, and made sure to mention the upcoming feature in Texas Living that would celebrate the spirit of local success stories. Lydia listened as if from a distance, her pulse slow and heavy in her ears. When dessert appeared, sugar dust clouds around plates of lemon chiffon, Evelyn turned toward her again, voice honeyed. "Lydia, dear, I must thank you especially for coming. Family means the world to me." She stood, leaned in, and gave Lydia a light, perfumed embrace. To the watching guests, it looked like reconciliation. Only Lydia heard the whisper pressed against her ear. "Next time, darling, bring flowers that don't look like they grew by accident, and maybe a nicer dress." Then Evelyn drew back, smiling for the cameras that always seemed to find her. The guests applauded, mistaking poise for grace. Lydia remained seated, the corners of her mouth set in something close to stillness. Charles Hart, from across the table, watched quietly, his expression unreadable. A moment later, the lights dimmed for the cake presentation. Candles flared. Voices joined in a practiced chorus of happy birthday, and Lydia clapped when everyone else did. The sound of her hands barely registered against the noise. When the song ended and the plates began to circulate again, Lydia excused herself. She stepped onto the terrace, the night air cool against her skin. Beyond the railing, Lake Travis shimmered with the reflections of the club's lights. Perfect, fractured stars trembling on dark water. She gripped the rail, steadying herself. Inside, laughter continued, muffled by glass and distance. Out here, the world smelled faintly of cedar and wind. The surface of the lake rippled once, catching a stray gust, and she thought how easily beauty could disguise cruelty, how stillness could hide the first crack in something once whole. That was when the fracture began, a tiny split in her composure, in her trust, in the quiet dignity she had tried to wear like armor. For the first time that night, Lydia stopped pretending to smile, and though no one saw it, the reflection staring back from the water looked stronger for it. The drive back from Lake Travis was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that hums low and restless between two people who are trying not to start something they know they can't finish. The lights of Austin stretched ahead in a long, glittering sprawl, the highway cutting through it like a blade. Blake's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale under the dashboard's blue glow. Beside him, Lydia stared out the window, watching their reflections slide along the glass, two outlines framed by silence. When he finally spoke, his voice came out tight, measured. "You didn't have to sit there looking like that." She turned toward him, confused. "Like what?" "Like you wanted to be anywhere else." "You barely smiled, Lydia. Everyone could see it. Mom worked hard for tonight. And you just," he exhaled sharply. "You made her uncomfortable." Lydia blinked, disbelief knotting in her chest. "I made her uncomfortable? Blake, she humiliated me in front of 30 people. His jaw tightened. She was joking. "That's just how she talks. You take everything so personally." "I was her joke," Lydia said softly. "She laughed at where I'm from, at what I do. You didn't say a word." He glanced at her, eyes flicking back to the road. "I didn't want to make it worse. If I'd said anything, she'd have felt attacked." "Attacked?" Lydia repeated, the word breaking apart on her tongue. "You mean defended. You didn't want to defend me." Blake drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. "You're overreacting. Mom doesn't mean harm. She's just old-fashioned. She values presentation, and you—" He stopped himself, but it was too late. "Say it," Lydia whispered. "Go on." He hesitated, then muttered, "You could try a little harder to fit in. Sometimes it feels like you're doing the bare minimum to make her like you." Her breath caught. "You think respect is something I can buy with new clothes and flowers that cost more than my rent?" He groaned. "Don't twist my words. I just mean she's trying. You could meet her halfway." Lydia laughed under her breath. But it wasn't humor, it was exhaustion. "Halfway? I've been running toward her since the day we met, Blake. And every time I get close, she moves the line farther." They stopped at a red light. The hum of the car filled the space between them. He stared ahead, shoulders stiff, lips pressed thin. She looked at him and saw someone she used to know, a man who once held her in a dusty Texas fairground, promising that love would be enough to bridge their worlds. But that man was gone. In his place sat his mother's voice wearing his face. "Blake," she said quietly, "when did you stop being on my side?" He didn't answer. The light turned green. The car moved forward. By the time they pulled into the driveway, the city had gone still, the air heavy with leftover heat. Blake got out first, not waiting, heading straight inside. Lydia followed, the soft click of her heels on the walkway sounding far too loud. The house smelled faintly of Evelyn's perfume. She'd left candles burning after her last visit, as if to mark her territory. In the bedroom, Blake undid his tie and tossed it onto a chair. "I'm going to bed," he muttered. Lydia stood by the window, her reflection faint in the dark glass. "Good night," she said, though she knew neither of them meant it. When the light clicked off, the room filled with the hum of the ceiling fan and the rhythm of distance. Blake's breathing steadied into sleep faster than she thought possible. Lydia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every word from the night replaying in her mind, each one a bruise that refused to fade. She thought of the first time she'd visited Evelyn's house years ago. The older woman had guided her through the spotless kitchen, admiring the china Lydia had helped unpack. Evelyn had smiled then, a slow, practiced smile, and said, "You have lovely hands, dear. Perfect for cooking." A woman should always be good at what she was born to do. Lydia had laughed politely, not realizing that it was less a compliment than a prophecy. Now, in the stillness of 2 a.m., she looked at those same hands, resting on the sheet, pale in the streetlight glow, and felt something shift. The ache inside her was no longer just pain. It was clarity, sharp and clean. She turned toward the window. The street outside shimmered under a row of lamps, each one reflected in her eyes like a promise. Somewhere in the city, Evelyn Hart was likely sleeping soundly, certain she had won the night. But Lydia knew better. Tonight had been the last time she would let anyone make her feel small. Morning light spilled across the Hart residence like liquid gold. sliding over marble counters and mirrored surfaces that reflected perfection back at itself. Evelyn was already dressed, cream blouse, tailored trousers, a silk scarf knotted just so. The faint scent of her perfume, expensive and citrusy, followed her as she moved through the house with purpose. Charles sat at the breakfast table, reading the Austin Chronicle, a mug of coffee cooling by his elbow. Evelyn's heels clicked softly on the tile as she checked her reflection one last time in the window glass. "Charles," she said, fastening her gold bracelet, "I'll be heading to the bank this morning. I need to transfer the funds for our France trip." He looked up from the paper, his tone mild. "Again already? I thought you handled that yesterday." "This is the final payment for the villa in Provence," she replied, slipping her purse over her arm. "You know how I am about leaving things unfinished." He smiled, faintly behind the paper. "Yes, dear. Thorough as always." Evelyn leaned over and kissed the air near his cheek. "I'll be back by lunch. Maybe we can go over travel insurance then." Outside, her car glided down the long driveway, sunlight flashing off the hood like a seal of approval. She loved mornings like this, efficient, predictable, perfectly under her control. Across town, in a small apartment on the quieter side of Austin, the day began differently. Lydia stood barefoot in her kitchen, the hem of her robe brushing the tile as the coffee machine hummed. The aroma filled the air, rich, comforting, ordinary. She leaned against the counter, watching the slow drip through the glass carafe. Her face was calm, but her eyes were distant. They had a stillness that came only after a long night of unraveling thoughts. The events of the previous evening flickered through her mind. The laughter, the sting behind the smiles, Blake's silence. Every memory arrived sharper than it had felt in the moment. When the coffee finished, she poured a cup and sat at the small kitchen table where the morning light fell in uneven stripes. A vase of fading flowers sat at the center, the same kind of wildflowers she had brought to Evelyn's party. They were wilting now, petals curled inward, the water clouded. Lydia stared at them for a moment, then reached over and gently removed one petal that had fallen onto the table. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over a familiar contact. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Liddy, sweetheart." Her mother's voice carried warmth and concern. "You sound tired. Did the party go well?" Lydia smiled faintly at the question. "It went as expected." She stirred her coffee slowly. "Listen, I wanted to tell you I'm sending the money back. The one you and Dad gave me to buy Evelyn's gift." Her mother's voice softened, puzzled. "Oh, honey, you don't have to. That was a small thing." "I know," Lydia said, "but I don't want it to go where it's not wanted. You and Dad worked too hard for that money." "Lydia, it's okay," she interrupted gently. "I'm fine. I just want you both to keep it." A pause followed, the kind of silence that holds unspoken worry. Then her father's voice came faintly in the background, asking who was on the line. Her mother answered softly, "It's our girl. She's being stubborn again." That made Lydia smile for real. "I love you both," she said. "We love you too, sweetheart. Don't let that woman get under your skin. Some people mistake kindness for weakness." Lydia looked down at her coffee, the reflection of her own face rippling slightly. "Not anymore," she murmured. By late morning, she was dressed and ready. The navy skirt and white blouse she chose were simple but crisp. Her hair, pulled into a low twist, revealed a calm precision that had nothing to do with vanity. On the kitchen table lay a thick envelope, cash and receipts neatly arranged. She slid it into her purse, took one last look around the apartment, and reached for her keys. The day outside was already warming, sunlight sharp enough to glint off car mirrors and street signs. Lydia locked the door behind her and started down the steps, the envelope a faint weight against her hip. Across the street, the trees swayed lightly in the Texas breeze, scattering a few yellow leaves along the pavement. The city stirred, engines revving, dogs barking, someone laughing faintly 2 houses down. It was an ordinary morning, except for the quiet certainty hardening inside her. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't angry. But as she walked toward the parking lot, the faint click of her heels on concrete carried a different kind of rhythm. Measured, deliberate, final. By the time she reached her car, Lydia already knew where she was going. The sun caught in the windshield, a flash of white that made her squint. She slipped on her sunglasses, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel. In her purse, the envelope waited, a silent witness to a decision that had taken shape long before she admitted it aloud. She turned the key, the engine stirred, and the car pulled out onto the street, toward the bank and toward whatever truth the morning was about to deliver. The Austin First National Bank gleamed with the kind of polished sterility that comforted Evelyn Hart. Everything here smelled of order. Clean marble, waxed floors, quiet power. She swept through the glass doors like she owned the place, her heels making the faintest rhythm on the tiles. The security guard greeted her by name, and the branch manager, Mr. Jenkins, a man in a pale gray suit, hurried forward with an almost obsequious smile. "Mrs. Hart, good morning. Always a pleasure to see you." "Good morning, Roger," Evelyn replied smoothly, adjusting her sunglasses onto her head. "Just a quick visit. I'm transferring funds for our France trip. You know, the villa near Avignon." "Of course," he said. "Would you like a private office?" "Oh, that won't be necessary." She smiled, a queen granting reprieve. "I'll only be a moment." She moved toward the counter, purse tucked neatly against her side, glancing at her reflection in the polished brass trim. That was when she saw her. Across the lobby at one of the automated teller machines stood Lydia. Her posture was calm, her shoulders squared, her movements precise. In her hand was a stack of cash, crisp bills, thick enough to catch the light. Evelyn's steps faltered. At first she assumed she was mistaken. Lydia couldn't possibly have that kind of money. But then Lydia inserted the bills into the slot, pressing the screen deliberately, and Evelyn's curiosity sharpened into suspicion. Her jaw tightened. What was that woman doing here? And where had she gotten that kind of cash? She started forward before she could stop herself, her heels echoing like small gunshots on marble. "Lydia!" she said, her tone clipped and sugarless. Lydia turned slightly, startled but composed. "Mrs. Hart." Evelyn's eyes dropped to the deposit slip on the screen, the scrolling numbers. Her stomach twisted. "What are you doing?" "Depositing money," Lydia replied simply. "That's quite a lot of money, isn't it?" Evelyn's voice thinned, sharp at the edges. "Where did it come from?" Lydia turned back to the screen, unhurried. "It's not yours, if that's what you're asking." Evelyn blinked, taken aback by the calmness in the reply. "Excuse me." "It's not Blake's either," Lydia said evenly. "So you can stop guessing." For a heartbeat, the entire lobby seemed to still. Evelyn's cheeks flushed a dangerous shade. She took another step closer, lowering her voice, but not her fury. "You listen to me. That is my son's money, isn't it? I knew you were ungrateful. But stealing from family—" Lydia removed her card from the machine, eyes steady. "I don't steal," she said quietly. "Don't lie to me." Evelyn snapped, her voice rising, breaking the polite hush of the bank. "I will not let you humiliate this family again. Security." Heads turned. Customers looked up from their phones, whispers rippling through the line. A young teller froze mid-count. "Mrs. Hart," said a calm voice from behind the counter. Rachel Perez, mid-20s, professional in a navy blouse, approached quickly. "Please lower your voice." Evelyn spun toward her. "This woman is depositing stolen funds. I want you to stop that machine immediately." "I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am," Rachel said, gentle but firm. "Our system doesn't allow interference once a transaction has started." Well, then call the police. Evelyn insisted, her voice loud enough to bounce off the vaulted ceiling. Lydia didn't flinch. The machine beeped softly, confirming the completed transaction. She waited, retrieved her card, and accepted the printed receipt. Then, with quiet precision, she turned, stepped to the counter, and placed the slip gently in front of Evelyn. There, she said. Proof of what I did. It's an account under my name. Rachel looked between them, uncertain. Evelyn, red-faced, snatched the slip, but couldn't form words. Lydia's composure unnerved her. It was infuriatingly unshakable. You're unbelievable, Evelyn hissed. You think acting calm makes you innocent. No, Lydia said. I think telling the truth does. She slid the receipt back toward herself, folded it, and tucked it into her purse. Then, after a pause, she met Evelyn's gaze with something that wasn't anger, it was pity. Not everything you don't understand is a crime. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lydia turned and started toward the exit, her heels soft against the tile. The room's murmurs followed her like the echo of a verdict already decided. Evelyn stood frozen, breath short, watching her daughter-in-law cross the glass threshold into sunlight. It wasn't the kind of departure she'd expected. No shouting match, no tearful defense. Just quiet dignity, which somehow stung worse than guilt. As the doors slid shut behind Lydia, Evelyn found her voice again, shrill and brittle. You'll have to explain this, she shouted after her. Do you hear me? You'll explain it. Outside, Lydia didn't turn back. She walked into the bright Texas morning, her figure reflected for a second in the glass before disappearing completely, leaving Evelyn Hart standing alone, surrounded by the faint hum of her own fury. The cafe on West 6th Street buzzed with the gentle hum of lunchtime conversation. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, painting golden squares across polished tabletops and the soft leather booths. Lydia sat by the window, her cappuccino steaming beside a half-eaten croissant. From her seat, she could see the slow rhythm of downtown Austin, pedestrians drifting past, cars sliding by, a world that seemed oddly calm compared to the storm still echoing inside her. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. The foam had collapsed, leaving faint traces of a heart that had lost its shape. In front of her, a small notebook lay open, but the page remained blank. She wasn't writing. She was just thinking, replaying the moment in the bank, the look on Evelyn's face, the quiet satisfaction of not breaking. The door opened behind her, and the cafe's easy murmur shifted. Lydia didn't need to look up. She felt it. The cold perfume, the purposeful footsteps, the sharp change in air pressure that followed Evelyn Hart wherever she went. Evelyn stopped at her table, voice already carrying that mix of outrage and disbelief. So this is where you ran off to. Lydia looked up, her face calm, her hands folded neatly on the table. Mrs. Hart. You made a scene, Evelyn hissed. In public. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? The manager called me afterward. People were watching, whispering. You've embarrassed this family. Lydia tilted her head slightly. The family or you? Evelyn blinked, stunned that the tone was not defensive but gentle, almost curious. Don't play coy with me. What you did was deliberate. Depositing money like that. Acting superior. Smirking while I tried to help you. I didn't smirk, Lydia interrupted softly. I finished my transaction. You humiliated me. Evelyn snapped, voice rising. Do you understand what that means? You insulted the Hart name, the one thing my husband and I built with decades of work. You should be ashamed. Lydia looked down at her cup, swirling the last of the foam with the spoon. I'm not ashamed. Evelyn leaned forward, lowering her voice to a fierce whisper. You should be. You come from nowhere, and you behave as though you've earned the right to look me in the eye. I gave you a place in this family, and you repay me with disrespect. Lydia finally looked up. Her eyes were clear and still, the kind that made Evelyn falter for a moment. "The money," Lydia said, "was from my parents. They sent it to me so I could give you something meaningful for your birthday." Evelyn's expression flickered, confusion crossing fury. "Your parents?" "Yes." Lydia's tone remained soft, but each word landed with precision. "They saved for months. It wasn't much, but it was from their hearts. They wanted you to have something that came from gratitude, not obligation." Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came. Lydia continued, unflinching. "After last night, I realized you don't deserve it. You mocked where I came from, the very people who taught me generosity. I won't use their money to buy approval from someone who sees kindness as weakness." The cafe had gone quiet. Even the espresso machine seemed to hesitate. Evelyn straightened, her anger giving way to disbelief. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Lydia placed her spoon gently on the saucer, her hand steady. "If you're afraid of dirt from the countryside, Mrs. Hart, then perhaps it's best not to let your hands touch the money of those who live there." The silence that followed was total. A few customers pretended to check their phones, but no one missed a word. Evelyn's face drained of color, the fury behind her eyes searching for a target that wouldn't make her look smaller. Lydia didn't give her one. She reached into her purse, pulled out a few bills, and placed them neatly beside the empty cup. "For the coffee," she said quietly. "Lydia!" Evelyn called after her, voice trembling between anger and something close to fear. "Don't walk away from me. You'll regret this." Lydia rose, adjusting her bag over her shoulder. "No," she said, turning slightly toward her, her voice calm, certain. "I think I'll be fine." She stepped away from the table, her heels soft against the tile, passing through the sunlight spilling across the cafe floor. The door opened with a quiet chime as she left, and for a brief moment, the scent of fresh air followed her out. Inside, the silence lingered. Evelyn stood frozen beside the half-empty cappuccino, the echo of Lydia's words hanging in the air like smoke that refused to fade. By late afternoon, the Hart residence felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves had absorbed Evelyn's fury. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, and the roast Charles had started but abandoned once her voice filled the kitchen. Evelyn paced near the counter, silk blouse immaculate despite the heat rising from her anger. "She humiliated me, Charles," she said, gripping her wineglass too tightly. "In public, at the bank, in front of everyone. She made it look as if Charles looked up from his chair, patient but tired. "As if you what, Evelyn?" "As if I were some kind of tyrant," she snapped. She was rude, arrogant. That girl's always been ungrateful, but this was calculated. She wanted to hurt me. Across the room, Blake sat stiffly, elbows on his knees, his phone in his hand. He hadn't said much since walking in, only listened while his mother's words collided against the quiet. "Did you hear me?" Evelyn continued, turning toward him. "Your wife caused a scene. The entire staff saw it. Roger Jenkins called after I left. He said people were talking. Talking, Blake. Do you understand what that does to our name?" Blake rubbed his forehead, exhaustion shading his voice. "Mom, please. Maybe it wasn't what you think." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "You weren't there." "I know," he said. "That's the point. I wasn't there." Charles took a slow sip of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Maybe," he said carefully, "Lydia was only trying to keep her dignity." Evelyn spun toward him, incredulous. "Her dignity? Charles, what about ours? She embarrassed me in a bank full of people." "Evelyn," he said softly, "it sounds like she didn't yell or cause a scene. You did." The silence that followed was thin and cutting. Evelyn's mouth opened, then shut again. Her husband's calm was infuriating. He had that unshakable steadiness that felt like condescension in moments like this. "You weren't there either," she said finally, voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare take her side." "I'm not taking sides." Charles replied, still even. I'm saying maybe she's had enough. You've never made it easy for her. That girl doesn't appreciate what she's been given. Evelyn shouted, her composure unraveling. We took her in, treated her as family, and this is how she repays us, by throwing our generosity back in my face. That kind of pride destroys people. It makes them blind to gratitude. Blake looked up at his mother, his expression uncertain. Maybe she's not blind. Maybe she's just tired. Evelyn turned sharply. Don't start with me too, Blake. He exhaled, thumbing at his phone again. I need to talk to her, he muttered. Charles nodded slightly. That might be wise. Go ahead, Evelyn said bitterly. Maybe she'll explain why she thinks she's better than us. Blake ignored her, pressing the call button. The line rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He tried again, waiting longer this time. Still nothing. He stared at the screen until it dimmed, then slipped the phone into his pocket. She's not answering, he said quietly. Evelyn laughed once, dry and sharp. Of course she isn't. She knows she's in the wrong. Charles said nothing. He simply looked toward the window, where the sun was slipping behind the live oaks, the fading light cutting across the floor in soft, uneven bars. Across town, Lydia stood in her small apartment, the late-day sun washing through the curtains. The silence felt clean, peaceful. Her phone, face down on the counter, buzzed once, then again, and finally fell still. She didn't move to pick it up. On the table lay the envelope she'd carried earlier that morning. It was thinner now. Inside were papers, neatly folded, already signed. The ink had dried hours ago. She ran her thumb along the edge of the envelope, not with hesitation, but with certainty. Then she set it down beside her purse and exhaled, a long breath that felt like release. The apartment filled with the low hum of the city beyond her walls, and Lydia looked toward the door, steady, resolute. The decision was no longer a question in her mind. When she turned off the lights, the room went dim except for the glow from the street outside. In that glow, the envelope caught the faintest shimmer. It was the only thing left on the table. 2 days later, the apartment was quieter than it had ever been. The air felt lighter, emptied of tension, filled instead with the soft rustle of cardboard boxes and the low hum of a morning radio. Lydia moved slowly, deliberately. She folded her clothes with precision, stacked her books in small, manageable piles, and labeled each box in neat handwriting. Kitchen, books, linens. Every motion had a rhythm, a calm she hadn't felt in months. The sunlight through the blinds cut narrow stripes across the room, illuminating the small details that had once defined her life with Blake. The framed wedding photo now face down on the counter, the mug with both their initials, the tie he had left draped over the back of a chair. She picked it up, hesitated for a moment, then laid it neatly on the seat, as if returning something borrowed rather than something lost. On the kitchen table, she placed her wedding ring. Gold, simple, its shine softened by time. Beside it, she set a folded letter sealed in a plain white envelope. The handwriting on the front was clear and steady for Blake. She sat for a moment before leaving it there, reading the words in her head one last time. I'm not leaving because I hate you. I'm leaving because I can't keep living in a place where I have to bow my head to stay loved. I tried to fit into your world until I forgot how to stand in my own. Please don't blame yourself for my decision. Just know that I finally remembered who I am. She traced the edge of the paper with her fingertips. Then she stood, slipped on her jacket, and looked around the apartment. Nothing more needed to be taken. Nothing else was hers anymore. Before walking out, she opened her banking app on her phone. The first transfer went to her parents, every dollar they had sent for Evelyn's gift, plus a note in the memo line. You were right. Keep it for something that makes you happy. The second transfer, smaller, went to her own savings, what little she had managed to protect. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin again. Lydia took one last look at the table, the ring, the letter, the empty coffee mug she'd leave behind. Goodbye, she whispered, Not to the walls, not to Blake, but to the version of herself who had once believed that silence was the price of peace. She locked the door behind her and didn't look back. The road out of Austin stretched wide and open under a pale afternoon sky. The skyline receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking with every mile. Lydia drove with the windows cracked just enough for the wind to thread through her hair. The radio played something slow and melodic, guitar strings and a voice that carried the weight of longing without surrender. Traffic thinned as she left the city. Suburbs gave way to pastures, the gray concrete shifting into rolling greens and golds. She could smell the earth, the faint sweetness of wild grass. For the first time in years, the air felt unfiltered real. She didn't think about Evelyn, not about the cafe or the humiliation or the fight that had followed. Those moments belonged to another life now, one she had quietly stepped out of. Instead, she thought of her classroom, of the children who called her Mrs. Hart with trust she hadn't earned but never betrayed. She wondered if she'd find another school, another place that would let her start over without apology. At one point, she slowed as the road curved toward the countryside near Waco, the same direction her parents lived, the same land where she'd once picked flowers on summer mornings. The sight made her chest ache and soften at the same time. A few miles later, she spotted it, a stretch of meadow just off the highway, splashed with color, yellow, crimson, violet, wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. The same kind she had carried to Evelyn's party. Lydia pulled over to the shoulder and cut the engine. For a moment, there was only silence, the hum of insects, the sigh of wind moving through tall grass. She stepped out, her shoes sinking slightly into the warm soil. The scent of sunlit flowers surrounded her, earthy and sweet. She walked to the edge of the field, crouched, and touched one of the blooms. Black-eyed Susan, golden and stubborn. It was rougher than she remembered, but alive in a way no store-bought arrangement could ever be. Lydia closed her eyes and smiled. The sound of the city was far behind her now, replaced by the quiet pulse of her own heartbeat. The wind picked up, carrying the faint rustle of petals across the road, scattering color where the pavement ended. She stood there a while longer, letting the air wash over her, before returning to the car. As she started the engine, she caught one last glimpse of the flowers through the mirror, bright, defiant, unbroken. They looked exactly like the bouquet she had brought to the party, the same ones that had been dismissed as too country. Only now, they didn't look small anymore. They looked free. A month later, the house on the hill above Lake Travis felt larger than ever, its rooms echoing with the kind of quiet that money couldn't disguise. The curtains stayed drawn most days now. Evelyn still woke early, still dressed with precision, still made her coffee the way she always had. But the ritual no longer had an audience. On the dining table lay a stack of mail she hadn't opened, boutique invoices, a charity gala invitation, and one envelope that stood out, plain white, addressed in an unfamiliar, careful hand. The return address read, simply, Travis County Court. She tore it open, expecting a mistake. But as her eyes scanned the first line, her breath caught. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her son's name, her daughter-in-law's name. A signature already written in firm, final ink. Blake, she called out, her voice too sharp for the stillness. He appeared at the edge of the hallway, shoulders slightly hunched, a shadow of the confident man she used to introduce with pride. I know, he said quietly. It came yesterday. You signed it. Her tone hovered between disbelief and accusation. He didn't look at her. Yes. Evelyn pressed a hand to the table to steady herself. You didn't even try, after everything we've done for her. For her? Blake's laugh was soft, bitter. You mean everything you did to her. The words hung in the air like a crack of thunder. Evelyn stared at him, but he didn't flinch. I thought she'd wait, Evelyn murmured. I thought she'd come to her senses. Blake shook his head. She already did. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the papers and the sudden, unbearable sound of her own heartbeat. That evening, Charles came home to find her sitting in the same spot. The divorce decree unfolded before her like an accusation. He said nothing at first, just poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "You heard," she said finally, her voice low. "I did." "She's gone," Evelyn whispered. "Completely gone. Not just from Blake. She sent a letter for you." She slid an envelope across the table. Charles opened it carefully, reading in silence. It was short, handwritten in blue ink. "Mr. Hart, thank you for always seeing me as a person, even when others couldn't. You reminded me that dignity doesn't need permission. I'll never forget that. Lydia," he folded the letter slowly, his face unreadable. "She's a good woman," he said at last. Evelyn looked away, her throat tightening. "Good women don't destroy families." "Sometimes," Charles replied gently, "they just refuse to keep pretending one exists." She didn't respond. Outside, the cicadas had begun their evening chorus, the sound rising and falling against the fading light. Blake's footsteps echoed faintly upstairs, pacing. Always pacing, until they faded into silence. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn kept to herself. The boutique ran fine without her visits. The charity board stopped calling. Even Sandra stopped dropping by, sensing that gossip about that little scene at the bank no longer landed as entertainment. One evening, Evelyn walked out onto the patio. The lake shimmered under the sunset, its surface calm and cruelly indifferent. She rested her hands on the railing, looking at her reflection in the glass doors behind her. The woman staring back was immaculate, perfectly painted, perfectly alone. Her mind drifted back to that birthday night. Lydia standing near the lake's edge, her blue dress catching the wind, holding that ridiculous bouquet of wildflowers. Evelyn had laughed then. She'd thought it harmless. Country flowers for a country girl. But now, when she closed her eyes, the memory hurt in a way she couldn't explain. The image of Lydia's quiet dignity, the way she had walked away from humiliation without a single word, had begun to haunt her more than the silence of the house ever could. For the first time, Evelyn wondered what it must have felt like to sit surrounded by laughter meant to wound, to be treated as less than human by people smiling through champagne. The realization settled deep, uncomfortable and heavy. She turned her gaze to the lake, where the water glowed gold beneath the evening sun. Somewhere in the distance, a bird skimmed across the surface, wings barely touching it before disappearing into the trees. Charles stepped outside and joined her without speaking. After a moment, he said, "She'll be all right, you know." Evelyn didn't look at him. "I'm sure she will." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "I just didn't think she'd be all right without us." Charles's reply was quiet. "Maybe that's the point." They stood there until the last light faded, the lake swallowing the color of the sky. Inside, the house was silent again. The divorce papers lay where Evelyn had left them, beside her empty glass. The last line of Lydia's letter echoed faintly in her mind. Dignity doesn't need permission. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart didn't feel powerful. She felt small, and somehow in that smallness she understood. Because revenge, she realized, didn't always come with noise or spectacle. Sometimes it came dressed in quiet grace, walking away without a backward glance. Revenge doesn't always shout, the narrator's voice might have said if life were a story. Sometimes it leaves quietly and lets the silence speak for itself.